Hey there, friends, it's David Lightbringer. That's me. I'm your tour guide of the strange and mysterious, and we are back to play a little game called, man, for a supposedly low fantasy magic series, A Song of Ice and Fire sure does have some weird-ass shit in it, doesn't it? Essos edition, and also Sothoryos, and maybe even Ulthos. You know how Ulthos is, it's down there somewhere. Anyway, that means we've got a lot to cover, so just like with the wonders of Westeros, thanks for watching everyone, we will be moving fast, but I'll mention longer videos and live streams that I've done on these various topics as we go, and then you'll be able to find the links to all those videos in the description below the video, which is also where you can find the thumbs up button and the subscribe button. You know what to do. I do work really hard to make these videos all by myself, just for you guys, so your support is appreciated, and an extra special thanks to our YouTube channel member Squishers and our Patreon supporters. Let's get started. Okay, so just like last time, we'll do some honorable mentions first, and then we'll get into the main list. And our first category of honorable mentions are things that are no longer around to see, but were once wondrous and weird, such as the Ifakevron of the eponymous Forest of the Ifakevron. They're also known as the Woods Walkers, and they seem to be a late surviving remnant, a pocket, if you will, of Children of the Forest in Essos. That's pretty cool, and I am going to make a longer video on them in the next couple of months. But basically, they appear to have been wiped out several hundred years ago, although you never really know with Children of the Forest. Maybe they're down there in caves somewhere. Next, we've got the hairy men, the OG hairy men, who were bigger and potentially hairier than their descendants, the Ibbenese and perhaps the Skygosi. These hairy men roamed all over northern Essos at one time, riding on the backs of their enormous one-horned unicorn goats, which is a behavior we find copied by their descendants. Both the Ibbenese and the Skygosi have the unicorn goats, so that's pretty cool. But the hairy men, the OG hairy men, are no mas, except for their descendants. Even taller than the OG hairy men were the Jogwin, the stone giants of the northern Bones Mountains. I'm pretty sure they're called stone giants because they lived in the mountains and not because they were rock trolls, but maybe they were rock trolls, and I don't think they were because the maesters tell us about their size, which means they looked at their bones. They were wiped out centuries and centuries ago, so that's the only way we'd know their height, which, by the way, supposedly they are said to be twice as large as Westerosi giants, so I'm not sure if that's height or mass, but Westerosi giants are like 11 feet tall, so these are some big boys, but again, wiped out by the Jogosnai. Then we've got the two wondrous and fabled kingdoms of the grasslands. The seemingly Dawn Age kingdom of the Fisher Queens of the Silver Sea, with the Silver Sea itself having been a wonder of the world, you know, back in its day, in its prime. But it is now only 3 small lakes, which are still pretty big. And those lakes are right in the heartland of the kingdom of Sarnor, which came after the Fisher Queens. Sarnor was a great kingdom for thousands of years, but they were wiped out by the Dothraki in the Century of Blood following the doom of Valyria, and the Dothraki didn't leave much behind, so there's not much to see anymore. Now you can find out more about all those vanished peoples in the Far Eastern Essos livestream that I did with Grey Waste Tim of the Grey Waste YouTube channel. Give him a sub, everyone. And basically that's me and Tim reading through the World of Ice and Fire for 5.5 hours and trying to explain all of it and vamping on theories. It's a pretty good time. Then I've also got the Sarnor Fisher Queens livestream. I forget the title, but it's up on the screen, as well as the Origins of the Dothraki video. And then I'll have that Ifakevron video coming out in the next couple of months. Alright, sticking with the Bones Mountains for our next runner-up, it's the Hyrkoon Lady Forts. That's what they are, really. Essentially, they are 3 Conan-esque mountain citadels which guard the only 3 passes through the Bones Mountains. They're called Bayasabad, Samiriana, and Kaya-Kaya-Naya, and they are the only remnants of the formerly great patrimony of Hyrkoon. And I say Conan-esque because George... not sure what he was going for here, but these warrior women, they have iron studs in their nipples and rubies in their cheeks. And lest any of you more adventurous gentlemen, warrior gentlemen in the crowd think you're gonna trek up the Bones Mountains and win yourself a warrior woman of Kaya-Kaya-Naya, you should know that they castrate 99 out of every 100 males, and you probably aren't the one, so don't go. The Bones Mountains themselves would qualify as a more traditional wonder of the world simply because they are so tall and so long. And speaking of tall mountains, super quick, extra honorable mention, the Mother of Mountains. It's very tall, and really I mention it because I don't know if I've ever said before that this is the Dragonmont from the Wheel of Time. Look at the maps. It's the same mountain in the same place. And that's interesting to think about because I think Daenerys and Drogon, when they do their Stallion Who Mounts the World thing at the top of the Mother of Mountains, well, that's probably going to parallel Rand al'Thor's awakening, which happened in, like, I don't know, book 12 or 13, as well as Lews Therin's original diabolical act on the Dragonmont, that created the Dragonmont, in fact. So shout out Wheel of Time fans, and our final honorable mention is the Valerian Roads and also the Volantine Walls and Long Bridge. These really do deserve to be on the list proper, but I already had the 14 thing going, and basically these are wondrous and incredible. The Valerian Roads go on for hundreds and even thousands of miles in a straight, unbroken line, and the Volantine Walls are so thick that 6 4-horse chariots can race side by side. Although I have to think one of them occasionally still gets bumped off and does a little woo Wilhelm scream off the side. And then the Volantine Long Bridge, well, it spans the mouth of the River Rhône. Don't know if you've heard about that. It's a pretty big river. And it's basically got a small town on it. They've got shops and places to string up criminals, and it's all made out of fused black Valerian dragonstone. Now, we pretty much know how the fused stone was made. Dragon lords used the flames of their dragons to heat stone to a molten state, and then somehow, I suspect with aeromancy, they're able to shape the stone and then harden it into place. They can twist this dragonstone into fanciful, ornate shapes like a dragonstone and in Valyria, but they can also do very, very straight and flat, like the walls and the roads. And really the only question here is the question of road crew dragons, which is just me pointing out that you wouldn't want Balerion the Black Dread and all his power and anger to, pave a road mile after mile, day after day, in an orderly fashion, working with the road crews. You would want a big dragon with hot flames, but you'd want a docile one that's used to people, not a war dragon. And I speculated on the idea of the Valerians breeding dragons for different purposes, like man does with dogs and horses in the video called Dragon Breeds. All right, the 14 weirdest and most wondrous places in Essos, Sothoryos, and Ulthos. And coming in at number 14 is the Summer Isles. Basically, I thought we'd go to one nice place first, since most everything else on this list is nightmare fuel. So there's 2 weird things about the Summer Isles. 1, the talking trees of Tall Trees Town, and 2, their origins. So the talking trees of Tall Trees Town are apparently so tall that they shade the entire town. They are probably called the talking trees because they have records carved into them, extensive records. That's right, the feathered priestesses of the Summer Isles, who sound a little more friendly than the women of Cimmeriana and Kaya I must say. They have essentially carved the entire history of the Summer Isles into these talking trees, as well as their laws and customs and this very curious map that we'll discuss in a moment. So that's probably why they're called talking trees, but one wonders, given the fact that the Black Gate Weirwood Face talks and that there are certain clues about talking weirwoods in the ancient past or maybe on the Isle of Faces, one wonders if there is or were some actual magic talking trees on the Summer Isles. And if so, what kind of tree were they? So that's a mystery. And then as far as the Summer Islander origins, well, I do think there is a mystery here involving Sothoryos. So the original maps of the Summer Islanders carved on the talking trees depict the Summer Isles and a world-encircling ocean with no other land. So that makes you think that they once believed that only the Summer Isles existed, but people do not, of course, sprout from a magic bean on an island. They have to travel to an island from whatever part of the world, humans first evolved from. We don't know where that is in George's mind, but it wouldn't have been on a remote island. So people started out somewhere, Sothoryos, Essos, who knows, and at some point the ancestors of the Summer Isles must have traveled to the Isles. So where did they come from? I think it's Sothoryos. Not only is Sothoryos in the approximate location as Africa would be if this were a map of our world, the Summer Islanders have very old legends of having once tried to found colonies on Sothoryos on the west coast. Their legends say that they were run off by brindled men and wyverns and everything else. But what if that memory is flipped around? What if instead of, trying to found colonies on Sothoryos, these are actually garbled memories of their origins, of when they were chased away from Sothoryos by all the monsters? That would make a lot more sense. There are, of course, ruined cities in the jungles of Sothoryos. And between the map and the story being flipped around, it kind of seems like the elders of the Summer Islanders changed the story so that no one would try to go back to their very dangerous homeland, which is something that Summer Islanders occasionally did, try to sail to Sothoryos for glory or riches, or because they cracked the code like we did and flipped the myth around and wanted to find their place of origin. So yeah, maybe the map is propaganda, maybe the story is flipped around as a cautionary tale. And again, if you look at the map, it's really the logical place for them to have come from. And then last detail about the Summer Islanders, they're famous captains who can sail the open seas in their huge boats, which are called swan ships. Well, they are said to possess secret maps of lands unknown to the rest of the Westerosi and Essosi. So that's pretty cool. Maybe they know, what's across the Sunset Sea or what the south coast of Sothoryos looks like. All right, coming in at number 13, it's The House of Black and White. It's definitely a weird place, although we do understand most of what's going on there. So for starters, it's a death cult. We understand that. They worship the many-faced god and all the other gods of death, who they say are all the same. And the Faceless Men are also an assassin guild. You give them money, and they kill people, which sort of undermines the first idea that they hold death to be sacred, but they'll dispense it for money. So yeah, we examined those sorts of religious contradictions, as well as all the other mysteries of the House of Black and White in the House of Black and White video. And of course, the main mystery involving the Faceless Men regards their eclectic use of magic. Jake and Hagar is definitely using a glamour to change his face, and that would be some sort of light weaving or light and shadow magic. It's something that we see Melisandre do also. And probably the Children of the Forest, they seem to be able to go out in disguise too, so they might be able to work a glamour, and the Faceless Men can work a glamour. More noticeably, they've got that skinning magic. They skin people's faces off and then use seemingly some sort of blood magic to affix the face to their face, and it comes across as an actual seeming. They look like the person and not a Freako wearing a skin mask. So I do think that the Faceless Men's skinning magic is the same thing that the Boltons used to practice, House Bolton in Westeros. Check out The Bolton Secret for more on this, but basically this is something that George has been working on in some of his older stories. He likes to write about werewolves, and in both Skin Trade and in the Lost Lands, skinning a werewolf while in wolf form is a way to steal their power. You could turn it into a werewolf cloak and then be a werewolf yourself. So, when we're told that the ancient Bolton kings used to sometimes capture a Lord Stark and flay him and keep his skin in the Dreadfort, well, they could be doing that for two reasons, besides abject cruelty. One, if they can do the same trick as the Faceless Men, they could pose as Lord Stark and enter Winterfell in disguise and sack it from the inside. Bolton kings have sacked Winterfell twice, and Ramsay essentially used a disguise to get inside Winterfell and sack it. And then, even more diabolically, the Boltons can steal the skin-changing or even green-seeing magic of the Stark Lord, if they have such a gift. So that's what I think the ancient Starks and Boltons are up to, and somehow the Faceless Men learned the secret. Although we don't know if this magic is amplified or is interacting with all the cut weirwood at the House of Black and White. They've got the weirwood door and, more importantly, the weirwood chairs. Weirwood and ebony chairs. But of course, a weirwood chair is a lot like a weirwood throne. So yeah, is that giving them visions? Is that aiding the skin magic? It's really hard to say. Let me know in the comments what you think about the cut weirwood at the House of Black and White. Another mystery is, what is the Faceless Man agenda, specifically concerning Arya? I recently did an Arya Returns to Westeros Winds of Winter predictions video, and as I've talked about in many videos, essentially I think the Faceless Men would hate the whites that the others raised, because if they worship death, the Walking Dead would be abomination. So yeah, I think they are actually training Arya, knowing that she is a skin changer, to be a warrior against the others. Believe it or not. And then finally, a couple honorable mentions in Braavos, the Titan of Braavos. It's very tall. Shout out to the Colossus of Rhodes. And the deep vaults and canals under the House of Black and White and the Iron Bank. Do they connect under the water there? They are kind of close on the map, and people have speculated that they do. All right, the 12th weirdest and most wondrous thing in Essos, the Mazemaker Mazes. Maybe this should have been higher, but we've got some pretty weird stuff left to go. So these mazes are truly huge. They are sprawling constructs of bewildering complexity, made from blocks of hewn stone and carved into the stone of the Lorathi Isles and the Essosi Headland. So that's really just a huge area that the mazes cover. And the largest Lorathi Isle, Loraesin, it's 75% all mazed out, down to a depth of 500 feet in some places. So there's a lot of mazes, a lot of mazes. This was a civilization that lived here a long time and was dedicated to carving mazes. So the mysteries here are plentiful. Like I said, why the focus on the mazes? What were they? What was the point? And then the maze makers themselves, that's the biggest mystery. We don't know who they are, they're vanished, and their skeletons show that they were larger and more massively built than average men. They're said to be not as big as giants, so probably in the 8 to 9 foot range, all the better to hew the stone and build the mazes. Now, later Lorathi legends suggest that the maze makers were wiped out by an enemy from the sea. Merlings in some versions of the tale, and Selkies and Walrus men in others. And of course, that's all just squisher folklore, basically. We're talking about deep ones. Then at some point later, the followers of the blind god Boash castrated themselves, wore blindfolds, and thought deeply about the mazes. But we're not really here to talk about them, because it's all about the maze makers. So who were they? Suspects include the Old Ones from the Isle of Leng. Based on the height of the Lengi, the Old Ones may be 8 to 9 feet tall, and they too carved underground cities deep in the jungle. Their underground cities are basically the closest match for the mazes of the maze makers of anything that we can find anywhere in the world of Ice and Fire. Then we have the OG hairy men of northern Essos, whom we mentioned earlier. They are said to be very large, so perhaps they're in the 8 to 9 foot size range. And the hairy men are actually said to be the first people that occupied the mazes after the maze makers. So maybe they were the maze makers. Maybe this is a bit of a prejudice or bias by the historians. You know, those hairy Neanderthals, they couldn't have done anything so impressive. But of course, in the real world, we've been learning recently that Neanderthals and Denisovans and other Homo species were a little smarter than we originally thought. Probably. This is all research, but yeah, probably smarter, so maybe the hairy men are the maze makers. The hairy men seem to have dominated all of northern Essos, and their ancestors, the Ibbenese, too, conquered a lot of northern Essos. So yeah, these aren't just like dumb cavemen here. And the Ibbenese are actually expert sailors. They build amazing ships, and they've got their own kingdoms and customs. This is actually my favorite suspect. The hairy men were the maze makers. But it could just as easily be a mystery race that George doesn't intend us to know about. Could just be one of those weird stories with no answer. And even if we don't know who they were, the intention could just be to show us that there are evolutionary links between giants and humans and hairy men that are like somewhere in the middle. And then final option is the deep ones themselves. Maybe the Merlings and Selkies didn't wipe out the maze makers. Maybe they were the maze makers. We'll talk about the deep ones more later, but they do have their hybrid thralls build things in stone. So perhaps. All right, number 11 on our list, it's the island of Noth. You know, the butterfly isle where Missandei is from. It's got a lot of butterflies, and also butterfly fever, which is pretty nasty business. The victims experience spasms, which make them appear to dance, then they sweat blood, and then the skin sloughs off the bone. And that's how you say that, by the way, slough. Definitely a $10 word, but not something you want to experience. So the thing about butterfly fever, which they think is carried by the butterflies, maybe the big black and white one, is that it does not afflict the native Nathi, but it does afflict everyone else. And so, even though many different slave nations, such as the Giscari and the Valerians, and then later the Volantines, have tried to exploit Noth, and the Valerians even left a fused stone fortress on Noth, which is the trivia answer to most obscure Valerian fused stone fortress. None of those people ever lasted more than a year because of the butterfly fever. So that's very mysterious, and equally mysterious are the Nathi themselves. They kind of seem like they might be children of the forest hybrids, mostly due to the description of their eyes, which is either large eyes of amber or eyes of molten gold or even amber flecked with gold. But then we also have the fact that they're called the peaceful people and they are vegetarians. So they're living in harmony with nature, and their god is the Lord of Harmony. He sounds a bit like Garth the Green. He's a laughing bearded giant, and he's attended by swarms of butterfly maidens, which is kind of Garth-like on vibes. He created everything, and he's some sort of nature god. So yeah, this seems like a very strange, distant echo of Children of the Forest and Green Man culture on an island full of poisonous butterflies. So that's pretty weird. And then sticking with islands off the coast of Sothoryos, we've got number 10, Gogassos, which poses the question, what's worse than butterfly fever? With the answer being the Red Death. So Gogassos, as many of you will know, began as Gorgai under the purview of the Giscari. It was a slave colony back then, and then the Valerians took it over 5,000 years ago and renamed it Gogassos, and it's been a slave colony ever since. So this may be the most misery-soaked place in the entire world. And as for the Red Death, 77 years after the Doom, meaning 77 years after the Valerians were no longer around to run their slave colony on the Isle of Tears, the Red Death swept out of the slave pits and across the island, killing 9 out of every 10 people, with the victims bleeding copiously from every orifice, their skin shredding like wet parchment. That's pretty much just another way of saying sloughing off the bone. So that's pretty bad. And even worse is the potential explanation for what's going on here. So Gogassos is where the Valerians were said to practice blood magic sorcery of the darkest sort, mating slave women and animals to bring forth monstrous hybrid abominations. And this may be linked to the Red Death. So Crowfood's daughter of the Disputed Lands YouTube channel, go give her a sub, has speculated that this Red Death is actually the same condition as Araya Targaryen's worms, her parasitic worms, with the idea being here that Araya, being a Targaryen, has some heat resistance, and so her Worms, which were creatures of fire, and which cooked her from the inside, were able to incubate longer and become larger inside a Targaryen than they would a normal human. She also bled out of all of her orifice. You'll remember the phrase netherlips is used. So perhaps the Red Death victims on Gagassos, maybe if we were to examine the blood coming out of the orifices, there'd be tiny little worms. And maybe the 1 out of 10 victims who survived didn't stick around long enough to examine anything that closely. And so, the reason why there might have been parasitic worms such as Araya experienced on Gagassos is because the worms may be the method by which the Valyrians actually produced hybrids, not by having animals and people, because if you look at Araya's worms, they are actually human-animal hybrids. They're worms with hands and faces. And basically, this is Dracomorph theory, so check out the Dracomorph video. But I think George is cribbing heavily from aliens and the xenomorphs. And I think those parasitic worms have combined their wormy DNA with Araya's to pop out as snakes with hands and worms with faces, which is how Septon Barth describes them. So again, check out the Dracomorph video, but this may be the answer to how Blood of the Dragon people were created. How did we get human beings with some sort of lizard DNA inside them? And speaking of the xenomorph, if you're watching Alien Earth, which, man, what a good show. Come on, Eye Octopus, that thing is, you're missing out if you're not watching. Then go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel Script Wolves, linked in the description below, where me and my friend Mickey will be giving our thoughts on Aliens and many other things, basically all other shows and books and movies which are not A Song of Ice and Fire. All right, it's time for some wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, which means that number 9 is the Sorrows, that weird place on the River Royne where Tyrion and the Shy Maid go through a little time loop. That happens at Coryane, former Coryane, the festival city of the Rhoynar, now known as the Sorrows. And there is that Bridge of Dream with all the stone men on top. The first time they sail under it, everything is fine, but then a couple minutes later, they sail under it again, and this time the stone men are all pissed off and they jump on the boat and attack everyone. It's either Yandri or Ysilla, one of the native Rhoynar, who explain this phenomenon by saying, well, Mother Rhoyne runs as she will. And there really is no practical explanation for this. This is some sort of ripple in the Matrix thing that George is doing. And it's definitely an allusion to the larger theme of the River of Time, and the fact that in Ice and Fire, the River of Time might have a couple of loop-de-loops. And here I'm talking about things like the Hodoring, where Bran will do some sort of mental time travel to, well, you saw it on the show. Something like that is going to happen in the books too. So in addition to the time loop, the Stone Men themselves, grayscale as a magical disease, is pretty freaking weird. It's definitely George's magical version of leprosy, and it supposedly originated with the Valyrians, and with Green Garin, the prince of the Rhoynar who was hung in a golden cage to watch all of his people killed or enslaved here at Coryane. He called down a curse on the Valyrians, and the foul humors rose from the Rhoyne and turned the Valyrians into grayscale stone men. So here I've got to give a huge shout out to Indeep Geek, who I believe solved the puzzle. This time loop thing has been bugging the fandom for years. And just a couple of months ago, he put out a video where he pointed out that right after they go under the Bridge of Dream the first time is exactly when Tyrion points to young Griff and says, aha, you are Rhaegar's son, a Targaryen. And even though we think he's probably not Rhaegar's son, he is still a Valyrian. And it may be that Tyrion naming him a Valyrian is what activated Green Garen's curse and caused the river to feed the Shy Maid and young Griff back to the Bridge of Dream and the now angry Stone Men. And it does kind of seem like they're going for Fagon when they attack the Shy Maid. So yeah, that was Green Garen's curse, still active and trying to claim one more Valyrian for the Stony Court. So there you go, that's the explanation. We still don't know how the time loop happened, but we know why it happened. It was Green Garen's curse. And then the final mystery connected to the Sorrows, why is Jon Connington seemingly bringing the plague of grayscale to Westeros? As if Westeros doesn't have enough bad stuff going on, and the Long Night hasn't even fallen yet. So why do we need grayscale in King's Landing? I don't know, but we're gonna get it. All right, number 8, it's the Thousand Islands. This is where it got too weird for Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake on his great northern voyage. But it's not too weird for us. We're only at number 8, so the party pooper maesters inform us that there may only be as few as 300 islands and not 1,000. But George likes his dressing, so they're the Thousand Islands. They're said to be the remnants of a drowned kingdom, like a sea level rise thing, but I've got a different theory, because these people are all fished out. A queer folk, inimical to strangers, a hairless people with green-tinged skin, who file the teeth of their females into sharp points and slice the foreskins from the members of their males. They speak no known tongue and are said to sacrifice sailors to their squamous, fish-headed gods, likenesses of whom rise from their stony shores, visible only when the tide recedes. Though surrounded by water on all sides, these islanders fear the sea so much that they will not set foot in the water even under threat of death. So that's pretty weird. These people worship fish gods and sacrifice people to the fish gods. And yet they are terrified themselves of the sea. And that's because the deep ones are terrifying. Don't know if you've heard, but take a look. You wouldn't want to fall into their slimy, scaly clutches now, would you? So yeah, I think these Thousand Islands people have been heavily farmed or hybridized by the deep ones. They've lost their language, they've got the green skin of the deep ones, and those filed teeth, well, those might be actual pointed teeth. Could be that the great sea snake assumed they were filed, and they are actually, in fact, the pointed teeth of the deep ones. Even if these teeth are not naturally pointed, but rather filed, this could be something they are doing in imitation of the deep ones, who again have pointed teeth. According to the very reliable folklore of Nimble Dick Crab, of course. And the idea here might be that these Thousand Island folks are trying to make their women more attractive brides for the deep ones, who come ashore to steal women. That's how it works. And so it could be that there are more than just fish-headed stone idols underwater, but actual ruins and cities, because in H.P. Lovecraft world, which is where George got the deep ones do in fact build underwater cities just offshore of places that they want to farm. And that's probably why the Ironborn and also the Tullys of the River Trident both speak of watery halls beneath the waves. Those are real cities of the deep ones, which their ancestors have visited. So yeah, that's what's going on the Thousand Islands. Don't go there. All right, we're halfway through the list, and we've come to number 7. It's the Isle of Toads. And here I will just read George Martin's prose once again. On the Isle of Toads can be found an ancient idol, a greasy black stone crudely carved into the semblance of a gigantic toad of malignant aspect, some 40 feet high. The people of this island are believed by some to be descended from those who carved the toadstone, for there is an unpleasant fish-like aspect to their faces, and many have webbed hands and feet. If so, they are the sole surviving remnant of this forgotten race.
Oh man, it's more hella fished out people, wouldn't you know it? These people are even fishier than the Thousand Islands folks. They've got webbed hands and feet. Although we do also see a touch of that with the Borels of the Three Sisters Islands. They actually consider webbed hands and feet a gift and call it the mark. And those Borels also do have a little bit of the Innsmouth look, which is that unpleasant fish-like aspect that the Maesters are describing. So I'll take this off now, but these are clearly deep one hybrids. That was fun. It's a little fishy in there, gotta say. Yeah, these are fish people. And their giant greasy black stone toad statue is specifically a Lovecraftian deity. His name is hard to pronounce, so I'll just put it up on the screen. But the point is, all of this is straight out of Lovecraft. Not straight out of Compton, straight out of Innsmouth. And it's the same, of course, on the Iron Islands, where they also have a greasy black statue of a Lovecraftian god, Cthulhu. That's what the sea stone chair is, pretty much. And you better believe some of those ancestors on the Iron Islands were also all fished out. Just have a look at Dagon Cod. He still has the unpleasant fish-like aspect, the Innsmouth look, if you will. So the Maesters would seem to be correct. These Isle of Toads people are some of the last remnants of this forgotten race. But not the sole remnants. We've got the Borels, we've got some Ironborn, and we've got those Thousand Islanders. But here, at least in Sothoryos, there does appear to have been a larger fish people civilization, because the Maesters mention other stone ruins all across the Basilisk Isles, which they also attribute to this former, again, fish people empire. Did I say fish people empire in Sothoryos? Yes, I did. Coming in at number 6, it's Yeen.
Maesters and other scholars alike have puzzled over the greatest of the enigmas of Sothoryos, the ancient city of Yeen, a ruin older than time, built of oily black stone, in massive blocks so heavy that it would require a dozen elephants to move them. Yeen has remained a desolation for many thousands of years, yet the jungle that surrounds it on every side has scarce touched it. A city so evil that even the jungle will not enter. Nymeria is supposed to have said when she laid eyes on it, if tales are true, every attempt to rebuild or resettle Yeen has ended in horror. So perhaps to the Maesters, Yeen is the number one enigma of the world. However, I've only got it at number 6 because, well, this is just more Fish People Empire stuff. As we've seen, the oily black stone is associated with Deep One hybrids both on the Iron Islands and on the Isle of Toads. And the Isle of Toads is just a quick trip down the River Zimoyos to Yeen. So yeah, if there's a Fish People Empire on the Basilisk Isles building idols out of oily stone, those are probably also the people that build Yeen. It seems kind of obvious when you think about it. And then when we look at the construction style of Yeen, megalithic square blocks, cottage-sized blocks, well, that's almost an exact match for Moat Cailin in Westeros, which is also built in a swamp out of megalithic blocks of black stone. At Moat Cailin, it's black basalt, but there is that one Theon quote where it looks like it's coated in a fine black oil after the rain. So maybe Moat Cailin is oily black stone, and maybe oily black stone is made from basalt. Black basalt is a volcanic rock, a silicate rock. So that kind of would make sense. And of course, the point of mentioning that is that Moat Cailin, I believe, is also a Deep One construction. Check out the Moat Cailin video, but yeah, I think this is connected to the Deep One presence on the Iron Islands. And basically all of this is taking cues from the doom that came to Sarnath by H.P. Lovecraft. And then when we talk about that Rhoynar colony who settled in Yeen and then was gone without a trace when Nymeria went there a few months later, to check up on them, well, that's basically a merging of the doom that came to Sarnath, where the people disappeared all in one night, and of course the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, which is a mystery, by the way, that was solved recently. They just moved over to Hatteras Island and one other place. So that's Yeen. It's definitely weird and haunted, and one of the most interesting and thought-provoking ramifications of Yeen is the idea that the oily black stone is toxic. The jungle won't come near it. We see that also at Asshai, and that implies that sitting on the sea stone chair might not be the best thing for those Greyjoy kings. All right, now that we've done a speed run of Deep One's theory, we can move on to number 5 on our list, Valyria, or more specifically, doomed Valyria. Because yes, even 400 years after the doom, it still somehow hangs over Valyria. And the best way to understand this is that it's like a magical fallout zone. Basically, the magic that went off and exploded here was so great that everything is still all messed up. And the doom really is on a scale that is hard to comprehend, the simultaneous eruption of 14 volcanoes on one peninsula. Not only did it destroy everything, but it basically burned the air to the extent that all the dragons died too. None of the dragons survived by flying away from this. So we're talking about, it's a disaster on an order of magnitude that really is hard to fathom. But we do understand the mechanics of it. The 14 flames themselves seem to be sources of magic, and the Valyrian pyromancers were able to use their powerful sorcery to essentially keep the volcanoes on a nice simmer so that they never built up pressure and erupted. And that's how you have a bunch of cities built on top of volcanoes for 5,000 years with, no trouble. So the doom essentially was a case of someone assassinating these mages, disrupting the equilibrium, and releasing all the pent-up energy all at once. I say that the Faceless Men were the ones who killed the mages, and the Faceless Men also say that, but what the Faceless Men will not tell you is that their partner in the doom may have been Aenar Targaryen himself, who conveniently fled to Dragonstone 12 years before the doom. So check out The Doom was an inside job, and dreams come from dragons. But setting aside my theories, and regardless of who caused it, we can say that the magic needed to keep volcanoes on a simmer is very, very powerful sorcery, and when that went wrong, it created a disaster that left a fallout zone. But the mysteries don't stop there, because again, Araya's worms, they almost certainly came from Valyria. And Balerion the Black Dread came back with a giant scar across his side. So what was he fighting with? Are there in fact still dragons in Valyria, or did he get into a fight with a fireworm? Or is this just George implying that there are monsters, of some indescribable sort in Valyria, the kind of monsters that could dish out wounds to Balerion the Black Dread? So we don't know how closely related Araya's parasitic worms are to the classic Valyrian fireworm, but Araya's worms were creatures of heat. They were killed by immersion in ice water, and they cooked Araya from the inside, so they could be closely related, and it does make sense that Araya's parasitic worms would be lingering in Valyria. That may be a place where they can survive. And if they were the key to the Valyrians' hybrid experiments, it also makes sense that there'd be some in Valyria itself, and not just on Gagassos. All right, number 4 on our list, it's the 5 forts. I guess that should have been number 5. But it's number 4, even though there are 5 of them. And they are very tall. Supposedly, they are 1,000 feet tall, and they are made out of fused black stone. Essentially the same thing that the Valyrians used, but this is before Valyria, and further east than the Valyrians ever went. So the first thing about the 5 forts is that they have drawn many comparisons to the forts on the wall, because the first thing they tell us about the 5 forts is that they guard the realms of Yi from, quote, raiders of the Grey Waste. And you know how that Grey Waste is, full of raiders of the Grey Waste, or they'll just ride out there and raid your stuff. But just as the Great Ice Wall of Westeros is not really built to keep the wildlings out, but rather the others, the ancient magical enemy. We are told that the 5 forts were not built by Yi, but rather their predecessors from the Great Empire of the Dawn, who existed in the same area before the Long Night. And in fact, the 5 forts are said to be built by the Pearl Emperor, and he built the 5 forts to keep out the demons of the Lion of Night, who sound a lot more equivalent to the others. So there are just layers of wondrous and weird ramifications here. First of all, this is a big part of Great Empire of the Dawn Dragonlord theory. Obviously, if these are built out of fused black stone, the most likely answer is that the Great Empire of the Dawn people were also Dragonlords. And there are many other clues about that, so check out those videos. But yeah, the 5 forts first and foremost tell us that Dragonlords existed in the Far East before the Long Night, and that they were concerned with building fortresses to keep out some kind of demons. So that has to make us wonder, were these demons of the Lion of Night the same thing as the others? We do know that the Long Night was experienced from Westeros all the way to Asshai, and the Grey Waste is said to be a frozen desert. So many people have speculated, including the maesters of the World of Ice and Fire, about a northern connection. These maps do look, suspiciously rectangular, as if George is trying to mimic the inaccuracy of medieval maps. So perhaps the Grey Waste and the jungles of Mossavi do connect to the Heart of Winter. And perhaps when the Long Night falls, the others come down from the Heart of Winter everywhere that they can reach. That actually would make a lot of sense. The other option is that these are some sort of equivalent demons to the others, but not the others. But either way, this is, invites a lot of speculation, and it's pretty crazy. All right, the tension is building. We're down to our top 3 weirdest places in Westeros. Number 3, the House of the Undying Ones. So I did, of course, make a longer HOTU video, and I'd like to give another big shout out to artist Novi Kavona, who did this entire series of incredible House of the Undying art, which we sorely needed because we did not have much. So first of all, the giant mouth door of the House of the Undying is pretty obviously a parallel to Arya going through the big mouth door at the House of Black and White, and also Bran going through the weirwood mouth door of the Black Gate under the Night Fort. Second oddity is the dwarf. It's knee-high, which I always freak out about, but it is weird, That's not like a Gimli dwarf. That's like a, I'm always entertained by the dwarf. But basically it just shows us that evolution in A Song of Ice and Fire gets a little wacky. And what's also wacky is the way that the building itself defies physics. So this is kind of like the Sorrows, the time loop of the Sorrows. But basically, Dany has the perception of climbing up endless flights of stairs, even though from the outside, the House of the Undying looks like a long, low, flat building. So there's some sort of shadow tower or illusion, or maybe Dany's just on a treadmill or sitting still and hallucinating everything, and we're probably not meant to understand, but definitely we're not following the laws of physics here. So much like the Sorrows, there's not a technical explanation, it's just mysterious. And of course, Dany is under the influence of the potent Shade of the Evening psychedelic brew. That leaves her open to suggestion, and indeed, the Undying Ones are pumping visions into her head. A lot of those visions appear to be true, but there's no doubt that they're in there too, messing with things. And we saw something similar with Euron, feeding Aeron Damphair, his brother Shade of the Evening, and then entering his dreams, at which point they became nightmares. So the shade trees themselves are definitely a big part of the mystery here. It's hard not to notice that they are color inversions of the weirwoods, and that the description of Bran eating the weirwood paste is very similar to Dany drinking the Shade of the Evening drink. With both psychedelic substances, it's like a mix of actual flavors, but then also like memories and emotions. So the big question is, what are the shade trees? Are they a different species of magical tree, or are they perhaps transformed weirwoods? Either way, we have the question of where the warlocks got them, because they don't seem to grow anywhere else in Qarth, just in their little garden. And the two suspects here are, of course, Ulthos, which, shout out to Crowfood's daughter again, may be a whole forest of shade trees. This map is more or less canon, and it's a purple forest, so what does that suggest? And I myself look to Asshai for the source of the shade trees, especially if they are trees that have been magically altered or poisoned in some way. All right, number 2 on the list, it's the Isle of Leng, the Holy Isle of Leng, which is also known as the Land of 10,000 Tigers, and 10 million monkeys. And yes, even the monkeys are weird. There are the spotted humpback apes, almost as intelligent as men. And then there's the hooded apes, as large as giants and very strong. So again, George seems to be hinting at, some strange evolution. Maybe giants and humans don't really have a common ancestor. Maybe they developed from different apes. Because we've got some giant apes and some super intelligent apes here. So yeah, I don't know what George is up to, but it seems to be some kind of hint about weird evolution. The second Leng oddity is probably zebras. The World of Ice and Fire tells us that the animal whom the Jogosnai bred with horses to make sources are in fact from Leng, and those would presumably be zebras. Because where do they get the stripes and the Z in sources? So the population of Leng is a mix. We've got people of Yiddish descent in the north in Leng Yi and Leng Ma, and then down in the south in Turene, we've got the native Lengi, who are much, much taller. They are in fact the tallest people alive in the world today, up to 8 feet tall. And they might be weird humanoids. They have skin the color of oiled teak with large golden eyes that can supposedly see further and better than other men, especially at night. So basically that sounds like children of the forest. The same skin tone and, more importantly, those golden eyes that can see in the dark, like, down in the caves or in the subterranean cities of the Old Ones in the jungles of Leng. And here I'll read to you about the Old Ones and their hostile immigration policy. The Empress of Leng was known to have congress with the Old Ones, gods who lived deep below the ruined subterranean cities. And from time to time the Old Ones told her to put all the strangers on the island to death. This is known to have happened at least 4 times in the island's history, if Colloquo Votar's Jade Compendium can be believed. Legends persist that the Old Ones still live beneath the jungle of Leng. So many of the warriors that Jar-Har sent down below the ruins returned mad, or not at all, that the god emperor finally decreed that the vast underground city's ruins should be sealed up and forgotten. Even today it is forbidden to enter such places, under penalty of torture and death. So that's all very fun and mysterious, but who are these Old Ones? Well, presumably they are where the Lengi got their abnormal height and their, weird golden eyes that see well underground or in dark places. That implies that the Old Ones are at least 8 feet tall, if not taller. So the Old Ones are kind of an H.P. Lovecraft thing. They are specifically an H.P. Lovecraft thing. And in his stories, the Old Ones are strange interdimensional gods, but they are worshipped on an island called Leng by some strange satyr people, some faun types, who are called the Men of Leng. So in A Song of Ice and Fire, the Old Ones seem to be the Men of Leng themselves, some sort of tall, faun-like satyr humanoids. And tall, satyr-like children of the forest would be green men, of course. The Old Ones themselves may have green skin, or maybe brown and green skin. Usually these type of creatures are drawn as walking trees. So you're going to see some green and some brown, just like trees. And these Old Ones are on a holy isle that doesn't like visitors, just like the Isle of Faces. So check out Secret Origin of the Green Men, Isle of Leng for the full theory, because there's a lot more to it, and it's pretty fun. But what it boils down to is that the Green Men of Westeros may have come from Leng, and these Old Ones who carve underground cities on Leng may be the same people who carved the underground stone faces in the Rainwood, and perhaps other mysterious tunnels in Westeros associated with weirwood trees. Alright, it's time for number 1, and by now you surely have guessed it. It's Asshai and the Shadowlands. It's definitely the weirdest place in the world. There's just so much going on here. It's a challenge to talk about this quickly, and that's why I'll be making a Stygiai and the Shadowlands video next week, actually. It'll be along next week. So we're just going to touch on a bunch of stuff real quickly. First mystery, Asshai, is even more of a magical fallout zone than Valyria, and whatever disaster happened here would have happened like 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. This is a Long Night disaster. Not only because Asshai is specifically tied to events related to the Long Night, but because it's been this way, dark and shadowed, as long as anyone can remember. And that's the second mystery. It's not just a fallout zone. There's literally a dark shadow that hangs over the whole peninsula. So that's pretty friggin' weird. The sky is red above Valyria, but here it's actually just kind of dark everywhere. Essentially, this place is a mix of Mordor, Chernobyl, the Gardener farm from A Color Out of Space, with plenty of Fallen Atlantis/Numenor vibes thrown in. And have no doubt, this entire peninsula is toxic. Only ghost grass grows here, and perhaps the plant that makes the Strangler, that's also said to grow in Asshai. And that's a poison. The city itself, of course, is made entirely of this oily or greasy black stone stuff, which is found elsewhere at Yeen, the Isle of Toads, the Sea Stone Chair, and maybe, just maybe, Moat Cailin. Then we have the mysterious river ash, which is black during the day and glows phosphorescent green, or we might even say radioactive green at night. It has only deformed, blind white fish swimming in it. And elsewhere we're told that animals don't live long or aren't there at all in Asshai. And the same goes for children. We don't find children in Asshai, either because they don't last long or yeah, it's poisonous, so, it's basically only for adult magicians. But getting back to the river ash, it flows down from Stygiai, the corpse city at the heart of the shadow, which is only visited by the Shadowbinders, who are themselves mysterious. What's behind the mask, guys? It's nothing pretty. And of course, Melisandre the Shadowbinder doesn't wear a mask, but she's probably wearing a glamour. And God only knows what she looks like beneath that glamour. And like Quay the Shadowbinder, Melisandre also trained in Asshai for years. Most likely at the huge Red Temple, which we know exists in Asshai. And then on top of that, we know that Mirri Maz Duur, as well as Marwyn the Mage, and probably Euron, have all visited Asshai. Daenerys was originally intended to see Asshai, but is now probably going to do that remotely through Glass Candle. Check out Glass Candle Cirrus. And so I'm going to talk about this in obviously more detail in the Stygiai Shadowlands video. But the very, very short version of what I think is happening here is that Stygiai, the corpse city at the heart of the shadow, is none other than ground zero for the Long Night meteor impact. So this is a Lovecraftian, poisonous black meteor. Again, think of Color Out of Space. And its toxic magic mojo is being carried by the river ash through the whole Shadowlands. So that is what is poisoning the city, and the land, and the animals, and the plants, and even the gold and gems from Asshai are said to have some weird, greasy, unpleasant, not a fish-like aspect, but it's messed up. It's cursed. So yeah, one of the big giveaways here is the population of Asshai. Currently, it's only got the population of a market town, even though the city itself is bigger than 4 of the biggest cities in the world combined. So this is a Dawn Age metropolis. It probably wasn't originally built out of toxic, oily stone in a poisonous land. This was probably once a very nice place to live. The center of the great empire of the Dawn, essentially. So this is all the handiwork of the Bloodstone Emperor, and basically we're told he worshipped a black meteor. He probably did that in Stygiai, which is surely nothing more than an oily black stone temple built around a giant meteorite. So the weirdest open question about Asshai is, were the deep ones involved in this? I'm not going to put my mask back on, but yeah, the oily stone is associated with the deep ones everywhere else. So, was the Bloodstone Emperor getting some of his bad ideas, from the deep ones or some Lovecraftian entity? He did start the cult of Starry Wisdom, which is another thing that George pulled out of Lovecraft. So yeah, that's where I will leave it with you. Again, Stygiai Shadowlands video coming out next week, and please do let me know in the comments what you think about all this weird stuff and what you would have ranked number 1. So with that said, thank you very much for watching my videos, subscribing to my channel. I do love doing this. I do love making these videos, and I couldn't do it without all of you. So, big hug. Westeros is a weird place. Come on, George! Give us the winds of winter. My body is ready. All of our bodies are ready.